Hello and welcome to Hashavua. My name is Yair Alon and I am an Israeli rabbi living in Brazil. You can find videos on my channel about the Parashot of the Torah and the Daily Zohar, both in Portuguese, and our new projects Talmud Vibes and Hashavua in English. Remember, all the videos have subtitles available in both languages, so activate the subtitles, check them out and enjoy. In case you missed our previous videos of this series, here is the link to the playlist. Make sure to watch it and let me know what you think of it, okay? And if you did watch it, thank you for coming back. As you are probably aware by now, Bava Kamma, our tractate, is about damages, whether deliberate or not. Our sages go through a series of scenarios in which damages occur and discuss who should be held responsible, and matters like compensations, fines, and also exemptions. This week's Dapim, the pages, begins by bringing back the discussion about a forewarned ox. As we have discussed in previous videos, an ox is forewarned if it was involved in goring incidents at least 4 times. 3 goring incidents could be maybe just that, occasional incidents, eventful situations. But a 4th time in the view of Torah law determines that goring is part of that ox's very nature, and that animal is indeed violent. So now our sages debate on the conditions to see whether and how exactly this ox should be labeled as forewarned, and once it is labeled as such, if this ox could eventually be reconsidered as innocuous. This last question is very interesting. Notice it is related to a more philosophical question. Once I say some trait is of the nature of the animal or a person, does it mean it will be like this forever, or can it be changed? The sages come to an ingenious solution. Why not decide the matter based on a test? I will agree to say that a forewarned ox can be considered an innocuous ox again if I put a child next to it to pet this ox between the eyes and the child is not gored. If the beast doesn't try to gore the child, this animal is indeed innocuous, and it doesn't matter if in the past we considered him forewarned. Do you think the sages are really saying we should apply this test in the practice, in a real-world situation, or maybe is it just a rhetorical suggestion? Well, the second question I mentioned is how we will count these 3 occurrences to declare an ox as forewarned. Is it enough for the goring to be committed all at once? Let's say the ox is on a rampage and gores 3 different people or even the same person 3 times. Can I say it is forewarned, or maybe it is only a bad hair day for the ox? If this is the case, maybe I should demand that the goring incidents need to happen somewhat independently one from the other. One goring today, another goring some days later, and another goring some days later. It's an interesting debate, right? Well, after this debate, and as is usual among the sages, they spice things up a little, mixing different laws to make things a little harder. Why simplify if we can complicate, right? So let's suppose I have witnesses claiming to have seen a malevolent ox goring people 3 times, okay? So now remember that witnesses are very important in Talmudic trials, and everything they say must be taken into serious account so the case can be judged accordingly. It is no surprise that a whole Talmudic tractate called Eduyot deals only with matters related to witnesses and their testimony. But okay, what is the complication brought here by the sages? Let me try to explain like this. In some cases, if the ox has caused damages, in order to pay for these damages, the owner of the ox must kill that ox, sell its carcass, and use the money as a means of payment. But depending on the damage caused and on the conditions of the damage, the carcass of the animal may not be enough to pay for all the damages caused. So maybe the owner will also have to sell some of his prime land, for example, to make up for the responsibility with the victims. Do you see where we are getting at? What if the accusing witnesses are conspiring? I mean, what if they had made up a plan and they decided to lie in court just to make the owner of the ox have to sell his land? Maybe they did that due to a personal vendetta, or because they are evil people. The ox did nothing, it's a lie, but the witnesses come to the court and say they saw that owner's ox goring people 3 times just to harm that person. The question then is, how could these judges be sure that these witnesses are not trying to destroy someone's reputation or only cause financial problems? Another important discussion of the chapter, although the matter is not really solved here, but in Tractate Sanhedrin. Okay, let's move to another debate. Should someone be responsible for damages if someone incites your animal to attack? Let's say you have a dog, and your neighbor provokes this dog to attack someone. If your dog damages a third party, is it your responsibility to pay for damages or that of the one who provoked and incites the dog? Maybe at first thought you would say, of course I have nothing to do with it. The one inciting the dog is to blame. But the Talmud brings another point of view. Maybe I have to keep watch of my dog. And if I know it may be susceptible to be incited, it is my responsibility to not allow that to happen. It is like knowing that I have something dangerous in my possession. Would I leave it unguarded and put it anywhere for anyone to take? If I have a gun, would I leave it laid down in the middle of my courtyard for anyone to take and use? So again, 2 opinions on who is to be made responsible. And what would you say? Well, moving on to one more topic. A discussion on limits of responsibility involving damage done in public areas and damage done in private areas. To give a quick example, if I dig a pit in the middle of the street, you fall into it and break your leg. I am responsible for it, right? But am I responsible in the same way if the pit was in my personal domain, in my yard, for example, and you were walking in my yard and then fell into the pit and broke your leg? Maybe in that case, I could say, what were you doing in my land? Right? During this discussion, our sages bring an important criterion for what is called a fortiori argument, or kal vahomer, as the Talmud names it in Hebrew. What is a kal vahomer? Basically, it is a logical reasoning. It can be applied in 2 directions. A. If a given logic applies to a more complex scenario, also called heavier, it should be applied to a simpler one, lighter. If you are punished for damaging 3 vessels, you should also be punished for damaging a single vessel. And the second direction is exactly the opposite. Thus, the case B, if in a lighter scenario there is a punishment, all the more so, kal vahomer, we can expect that there will be one punishment in the heavier scenario. If there is a punishment for breaking 1 vessel, all the more so, kal vahomer, if I break 3. As I said, logical reasoning, pretty easy, right? This is kal vahomer. But there is a catchy issue on this matter, a kind of limit to this logic, and our sages call it dayo, meaning sufficient, enough. Dayo means we cannot apply the kal vahomer further than this, like up to here, up to this point and no more. Dayo means, for example, that the punishment for something would not be increased proportionally as the cases become more and more severe. So let's take the hypothetical case of the vases I mentioned before, okay, to continue in the same logic. Let's imagine that the punishment for breaking a vase is 7 years in prison. Again, only a hypothetical case, okay? Not true in Torah, nor anywhere I know. But let's say if I break a vessel, I have to go to jail for 7 years. So if I break 3 vessels, according to Kalva Homer, I should go to prison for 21 years, right? According to Kalva Homer, right. But then, Dio, we restrict the logic. I will go to jail only for 7 years, and it doesn't matter if I broke 1 or 3 vessels. So, as I said, a big part of the Dapim of this week is devoted to this matter. How do I apply Kalva Homer, and how do I apply Dio? One of the most interesting discussions of this week's Dapim happens in Daf 27b and concerns the matter of taking justice into one's own hands. This is a topic discussed even nowadays and is even used as a plot in many movies and TV shows, like Dexter, The Mentalist, and others. So, what's the Talmud view on that? Do I have to go to the court every time I have a problem with others? Are there cases I can resolve by myself? If yes, which cases? So our sages end up agreeing that sometimes, to be honest, it is not practical to go to court. And yes, we must take matters into our own hands. What cases are these? Well, those I need to act in order to prevent worse things from happening, or further losses and damages would ensue. So the sages are very pragmatic. They recognize that sometimes I cannot expect someone to leave the problem or the issue as it is, go to the court, make a petition, wait for the sages to debate, judge, decide, and then apply the law. Meanwhile, worse things could happen. People could get hurt, God forbid. Losses could happen. Further damages could come to the parts. In these cases, the Talmud says, I will take justice in my own hands. The sages are careful, however, to point out and remember that we should always rely on authorities to ensure our rights when the situation allows it. They stress that sometimes things cannot wait on the legal system to help us, and it is only in that cases that I can rely on myself. A last discussion worth mentioning here is the matter of legality versus morality. In other words, sometimes following the law is not exactly the same of doing the right thing, or what is considered good. In the Talmudic sense, the sages explain that sometimes something is legal according to human law, but such acts violate divine law. So the act is legal, but is not good. It is not moral. The discussion is far from being simple, as we know that Halacha derives from Torah, the word of God itself. So we could argue, how can I be following the law, but not what God wants, right? But to simplify matters, maybe we can understand that our sages are reminding us that regardless of how much we try to be just and upright, true justice can only come from God. And only He is the one who can say if we are acting as we should, and no human has this ability, even the greatest scholars, rabbis, judges, and Talmudic scholars. Do you agree with this last comment? Is there a gray area maybe between following the law and doing what is right and good? Can you give me some examples maybe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Well, as usual, this week's Dapim bring us a million different ideas to explore. But I would like to focus on 3 main topics that we could expand from our sages' wisdom and apply to our modern and day-to-day life. Remember that these are only my reflections, okay? And not the teachings of the sages. If you disagree with them, it's alright. In fact, if you disagree with them, I would say you are with a very Jewish and Talmudic attitude, and this is great. Don't let that hinder you from giving your opposing and contradicting view in the comments, as maybe perhaps your ideas may even help someone who is watching the video. Okay, so first point that I would like to discuss with you. So we mentioned the case of a dog causing damage to others because it was incited, it was provoked. As I said, the debate is complex, but the Talmud basically concludes saying that regardless of provocation, it is always up to the animal's owner to ensure that the dog does not attack anyone, even when incited to. In fact, this is the literal excerpt from the Talmud. I'm going to read that with you. Or perhaps we say to him, since you were aware that if others incite your dog, it is prone to being affected by the incitement and attacking, you ought not to have kept it in your possession. Since you did, you are liable for the damage and the injuries it causes. Okay, Yair, but I don't have a dog. So what's your point? Well, my point here is that this goes way beyond a literal dog. It is about the principle, not the particular case or the example given by the Talmud. We can apply the same logic, for example, to our reactions. How many times in your life has your inner dog attacked someone when you were provoked? A coworker, a lover, a parent. We must be aware that we are prone to attacking when provoked. And more than that, we must know what it is that incites and provokes us and make fences to prevent the provoking from happening. Let's suppose that you get into real bad mood when you are hungry, as many people do. Do this give you the right to hurt people? No, it doesn't. So what are you going to do to prevent this provoking? Maybe you will try to have regular hours for your meals, instead of barking at people and then saying, oh, I'm sorry, I had a really busy day and I didn't have lunch today. So, you see, this is your fault, not theirs. Maybe you will carry a chocolate bar along with you, and when you start feeling hungry and you see that you are getting into that bad mood, just go for that bar. This totally relates to another passage of the Talmud, in which the sages conclude that humans should always be considered forewarned. Forewarned, as you remember from the discussion of the ox, means it is part of the very nature of the species or the individual to cause damage. The sages are telling that we humans are always dangerous, and according to them, even in our sleep, we move around and we break things. We are forewarned. So when we walk into a discussion, for example, especially a tense one, we should expect that under stress and when confronted, we tend to be rude, to use harsh words, maybe to swear and curse. And knowing that, it's our total responsibility to work on this and not let that dog to be incited. Maybe we have to think what kinds of arguments will be raised against me and how we may respond in a strategic way. That is not about being manipulative. That is about being effective. Think a lawyer preparing his client to a trial. He knows the opposing part will ask difficult questions to his clients. He or she needs to make sure the client will answer calmly and in the best possible way. If our inner dog goes berserk and starts biting everyone, we accomplish nothing, and we will still be held responsible and will have to pay. So we are given a special status in the creation and the possibility to raise above the angels. And yet, sometimes we sink deep into our primitive responses instead and lower ourselves to responding like any other animal. Is that proper? That is not what Hashem created us to do. We are given emotions, of course, but we are also given intellect, brain, mind. Thus we should use them in harmony. We must not allow to be incited, whether during an argument, whether in another case. Remember, we are forewarned. We have been aware of that at least for 2,000 years now. Okay? Well, the second point, the second issue that I'd like to bring back again from our discussion and to expand the reflection is the distinction our sages drew between damages caused in a public space as opposed to damage caused to someone in their own private space. The first point I would like to consider here is mentioned in Daf 27b, when one of the Amoraim, the later sages, mention a cultural distinction in the way people use the public areas in Eretz Israel and in Babylonia. Remember that there are two Talmuds and that there were two different centers that originated these legal and philosophical discussions. So the first very interesting idea here, and I would like to point out, is cultural awareness. Many times when we are, for example, visiting someone's private space, such as when we go to their house, we are faced, of course, with different ways of doing things or understanding situations. It is perfectly proper to have distinct opinions about things. Sometimes I would say it is even necessary. It might be that our host in this scenario is doing something we consider to be rude or even wrong. In that case, we must keep in mind, however, the limits of our behavior, as we are in someone else's private space. That doesn't mean, of course, we should accept any abuse or prejudiced opinion, of course. A damage is still a damage. But I must remember that this is the space of that person, and she has the right to dig a pit. I am the one who has to be careful not to fall into it. We should definitely try and be diplomatic and mindful that this scenario is different to a public space. Maybe do not think about a personal house, but imagine when you visit another country, for example. Of course, there will be some cultural specificities and differences, for instance. There is also true, another case, about a person's social network. Even though in this scenario, the limit between public and private is quite blurred, it is their space after all. Many people just forget what for me is a very simple rule. Someone's Facebook wall is their wall, so they can post whatever they want and think, and they do not have to agree with you in any way, mind you. If they post something you totally disagree about their worldview or politics or whatever, remember, it is their social network. You shouldn't go there, reply to their post, try and correct them, tell them how wrong they are or something like that, or worse them, curse them. This will only cause discussions. Just leave them with their opinions. They are entitled to it. And of course, this doesn't mean that the person has the right to break the law, okay? I am referring to a case in which, for example, you are voting for party A and the person for party B. In case the person does break the law, in case the person posts something offensive, etc., there is always the option to report the post. Every social media has it. If you just don't like it, then it's your problem. There's not much you can do. But if it's really criminal, report it. Remember that the world does not have to agree with you, okay? And the last point I would like to bring here starts in DAF 27b. It is about someone else not respecting an agreement and your rights and how you should deal with it. As we saw, the sages do say we have the right to take things into our own hands. One of the sages, called Ben Bagbag, goes as far as saying, suppose someone stole one of your things, let's say a bike. Then you pass in front of his house and see the bike there. According to him, to Ben Bagbag, you should enter the house, break the thief's teeth, and take your bike back. Meaning, use the force if needed. Let's be honest, this is not the kind of advice you would expect from a wise elderly gentleman. But what I would like to mention here is that there is a limit to how much should you take matters into your own hands. The limit is brought in DAF 28a. What I think we can take from the whole discussion then is the need to be proactive. If you are offended and you have your rights violated, you should act. You should stand up for things you believe in, for who you are, and you should fight for what is right. Do the best you can to defend yourself, okay? The Talmud is against attitudes like, oh, well, what can I do? If this happened, it must be God's will. I will only surrender myself and thank God for what happened. No, 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 no. However, there are ways of being proactive and claiming for my rights. I can't do anything I want, and there are proper ways of doing things. So another example. Suppose I buy a product, for instance, and it is defective. I cannot simply go to the shop I bought it and destroy the product in front of the seller. There is a proper way to ask for a new product. I will show the receipt, I will ask for a refund for a new product, okay? Extreme measures can only be used as a last resort, and sometimes not even so. Once again, we need to remember that living in a community, in society, is part of what makes Jews Jews. Judaism is about community values. A very important point raised in DAF 28a is that I should act to have my rights only in the exact measure needed to have my rights. Yes, I know that the sentence seems redundant, but you heard me right. I cannot overexert myself, use more force than necessary to have my rights. Let's see an example of the Talmud itself, and it will be clear. Let's suppose my ox is fighting with my neighbor's ox, and I am afraid my ox can be killed. Okay? I want to end the fight and separate the two oxen apart. The Talmud says that if a push is enough to make the neighbor's ox go away and stop attacking my ox, this is what I should do, and nothing else. If a push would be enough, and instead I choose to shoot the ox dead, I am very, very wrong, even though I was acting based on a right premise, meaning to stop a fight and preventing my ox of being harmed. So you can understand the principle as following. You can and must fight for your rights, for what is right, but fight only what is necessary, without causing more harm than needed. Is there a possibility to talk instead of fighting to solve the problem? Then do. Can I just ignore and wait for the problem to be solved by itself? Then do. If the conflict cannot be avoided, then engage it, but don't overexert. Okay, what are your thoughts on it? Share your views in the comments. Whoa, many deep reflections to take home, huh? I think we had a deep study this time. As you see, every DAF presents an opportunity to analyze our life in some way or another. It's amazing to study this wisdom given by Hashem, by God, and passed down through generations, right? And by watching this video, you are also joining the dialogue, the discussion, and connecting to this chain of our precious tradition. And as I always say, if you like this video, make sure to check our other projects, other channels here in my channel. As always, like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you feel that our video has moved you, please consider becoming a member through our Patreon or the YouTube membership club. Thank you for watching, and I wish you from the bottom of my heart a fruitful week with your Torah and Talmud studies. Stay healthy, stay tuned, and until next week. Shavua Tov.